Hello, everyone, and welcome to Healing Connections. This is Emmy Vadnais. Today, we are talking about magical healing with Dr. Paul J. Leslie, who is a psychotherapist, educator, and international trainer who has extensive experience in creative, resource-directed approaches to working with clients. He offers training and coaching to other professionals to help them find innovative ways in which they can bring more creativity, wisdom, and healing to their work. He assists others in becoming open to the magic and mystery of life while transcending the limiting patterns which bind them. He is also an author who writes in the areas of psychotherapy, healing, and personal transformation. One of his most recent books is The Art of Creating a Magical Session: Key Elements for Transformative Psychotherapy, which is the topic of our conversation today. Welcome, Paul. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you, Emmy. It's an honor to be with you.
Well, I really enjoyed reading your book tremendously, and I'm an occupational therapist, and so I understand, in my profession as an OT, we have our roots in mental health, and I really appreciate a lot around how you talk about really thinking outside of the box from how a lot of practitioners have been trained. And it seems that there might be a transformation happening in psychotherapy.
Well, I hope. Unfortunately, I think for the last, 30 years or more, our field has become so focused on thinking that we understood what healing is, but I'm afraid that there's a lot of misunderstandings. We've been so focused on certain types of theories, certain types of techniques, certain types of theories about theories, and we forget sometimes that good therapy of any kind is a dynamic interaction between the therapist of any sort and the patient client. And my goal has kind of been over the last couple of years is to find ways in which, what are those common factors, if you will, that create these, what I'm referring to as magical sessions. And let me just say what I believe what a magical session is. A magical session is slightly different than what a lot of people go for in some types of therapeutic work. They go for an effective session, and that's fantastic. I think if you can be effective most of the time, then you're doing great. But for me, there's a step kind of beyond that. A magical session is a session not just that's effective, that there is a profound shift in the awareness of the person, how they, even the therapist as well, how they view themselves in relation to their problem, in relation to the world around them. There's a major shift that goes beyond just, for example, I'm not as anxious as I was when I started 5 sessions ago, to where there's something more profound happening. I call it magical, not so much, to where it's only mystical, but magical is in one of the definitions I found is that it's removed from everyday life. So there's this tremendous source of energetic creativity that occurs between, therapist and client, that not only is the client obtaining his or her outcomes in therapy, but something just rather remarkable happens that sets in motion a process to where that person no longer views themselves and their lives in the limited way that they did before the session. Now, unfortunately, this is not something that can be taught in a very linear, regimented, systematic way, as most, I hate to say this, but most psychotherapy is. You have your client, and when they do this, you do that, and make sure you're following this. And I'm not saying those are bad things, but what's happening, I think, is the last 30, 40 years, psychotherapy has started to align itself so much with what we call the medical model, and that's seeing the clients as being mentally diseased. I mean, no therapist would say that out loud, but that's what the medical model is. There's a disease and there's a process to eradicate the disease. And in some places in medicine that is incredibly effective and needs to be maintained. But people are so much more complex than a very linear A to B. What we've done in my field is spend years trying to come up with what I refer to as an explanatory model of healing, meaning, well, the reason you're screwed up is, A, B, C, D. Well, it could be your childhood, it could be your rational thoughts, it could be your family relationships, could be your attachment issues. And none of those are incorrect, and none of those are correct, depending on the person. I'm calling for not an explanatory model, but an interaction model in which both parties are alive and dynamic and engaging and flowing and being spontaneous to just take the therapeutic interaction out of the realm of a medical or disease model into the realm of the unknown, which is something that a lot of people are uncomfortable going. But I have found that the unknown is generally where real healing takes place. And for practitioners of any type, the more you stay away from the unknown, sometimes you're missing out on some really profound things that can happen. And that's why, as one of my colleagues told me one time, he said, I think psychotherapy is just profoundly boring instead of profoundly healing. And I said, well, why would you say that? He says, because more and more people are staying so close to what they know, but you never learn anything if all you do is stay so close to what you know. So for me, a magical session is moving beyond that. I mean, not just with therapists, with coaching, with hypnotherapists, people in your field. We still have to stay, kind of on our ethics, on our professional guidance, but there's more to people than these linear explanatory ways of being.
Well, thank you for all that you're doing. I can really see that you're progressing healing, consciousness development, personal development forward in ways that I think are really beautiful and enlivening. How much do you think practitioners' attachments, their own attachments to feeling safe in the sessions themselves, impact their ability to create more of a magical healing session with their clients?
I think that's one of the most important things that any type of practitioner can do, is to learn to trust him or herself. And we are so taught, I mean, all of us, and that, you got to be careful. And that's why we have ethics codes and all that. And all that's important. I'm not saying it's not. But sometimes when we're so afraid to do something that might initially not make sense, but yet we intuitively feel we need to go there, we are robbing ourselves. As one of my mentors said, it is unethical in many ways to not follow your gut, to do something that would help the client. But I think it comes down to, we're afraid of losing control. I mean, when you have these explanatory models, there's an explanation for everything. But when you can't explain something, there's this remarkable thing called mystery. And we don't like mystery. We say we do. Maybe if it's Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple, yeah, we can watch it from a distance and say, well, that was really clever and fun. But we don't want mystery in our session. We don't want to know, that we don't know things. It's like the things that we know are usually often not the things that we need to know. So just this ability to let go and see what evolves. So if a client says something that may seem an offhand comment, your gut says to follow it or to ask about it, I think it's imperative to just see where that goes. For example, I read the other day about a medical doctor who was working with a patient, and the patient said something, I don't remember what it was, and the doctor had this nagging feeling that she needed to ask the patient. So it's totally weird, but that following that, it ended up finding out, oh, there's actually some issue with mold in the house, which transformed the entire diagnosis. So if we keep ourselves so limited to some kind of pre-planned, boring interaction, it's hard for this mastery to emerge, because mastery comes through mystery. I mean, they're very close in spelling, and I think there's something to that. The more comfortable you are with the mystery, that's how you master these interactions, by staying so tied into how you think things should proceed, you oftentimes cheat yourself out of expanding yourself as a practitioner. Now, it doesn't mean that we just jump and say and do anything we want. There has to be some kind of awareness, self-awareness, as in, this really isn't about me. I'm just feeling pulled to say this or to do this. And sometimes it may look kind of outrageous. Sometimes it may look absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I remember years back, I had a client who, after 2 or 3 sessions, was just stuck being someone who had her children walk all over her. She kept saying that they walk all over me, and she wouldn't stand up to them, and all of this. Well, one way we deal with that in therapy is we have to challenge their beliefs about, walking on it. Then we have to work on their behaviors. But something told me to go and leave the room for a minute. So I excused myself. And as I stepped out of the door, I saw this big rug on the floor in the hallway. So I picked up the doormat and walked into the therapy room and threw it on the client and just sat down and looked at her. I didn't say a word. And so she's trying to figure out what the heck just happened. She's looking at why did you throw a doormat on me? And then all of a sudden, I could start to see her tears start in her eyes, and the rug kind of slid off her lap, and she pointed and she's like, I don't want to be that. It's like she had to have this experience that was so out of the norm of a verbal interaction that's very planned and calculated and things like that. So that was just an intuitive thing. I took the leap. Nobody was going to get killed. I've never heard of anyone getting sued for rug throwing. I mean, there may be a case out there somewhere, so I might want to, talk to my attorney just to be on the safe side. But those are the kind of things where something new, something out of the ordinary happens. And unless we allow ourselves to tap into that intuitive nature, which I know you're well versed in, to create those openings, those mysterious movements away from the problem that sometimes lead us to a better solution or even beyond a solution, we stay limited. So yes, I absolutely believe that sometimes our own adherence to a theory, to a technique, to a fear of outside authority who needs to tell me how I need to do to be a good boy or good girl, those often stand in the way of us truly creating these healing and magical sessions.
Yeah, your book has many fabulous stories like that in there. And I love that one. How did you get into becoming more confident doing things like throwing a rug on your client and move from transformational therapy or move into creating more transformational therapy versus just simply effective therapy and bringing you more to having these magical healing sessions?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, but we'll make it very, very brief. Several years ago, I started doing this research. I live in the United States in Southeast and South Carolina, and there's this culture, wonderful culture on the coastal areas of the Carolinas and parts of Georgia that's known as the Gullah. Now, the Gullah are the descendants of slaves, people brought over who became slaves in the United States. And at the end of the Civil War and Reconstruction, a lot of the plantation owners and people started to move away from the coastal areas because there's nothing for them. They didn't have anyone to work to do the land because the slaves had been freed. So the slaves were kind of for many years left to their own ways of doing things. So they kind of lived out in an area called the Sea Islands, somewhat isolated. And what you found is that they created their own language, which is a blend of English and African and just a fascinating cultural blend. They have a spirituality that's rooted in Protestant Christianity that they were taught when they came here, but yet there's a lot of African mysticism hidden in there and still applied. So I got really fascinated with the culture, and I started doing some research, and that kind of led me to exploring how they did healing and magic and things like that. Because for many years, access to white doctors wasn't an availability thing due to slave times and Reconstruction and Jim Crow. So they had to kind of heal their own people many times. So getting to talk to people who were at least open enough to discuss these matters with me was, so that started a shift, because what I saw is that people would come with, things that they would come to see me, like anxiety, depression, marital woes, and even some more severe issues. And they'd go to these spiritual healers that they refer to as root doctors. They got the term due to the medicinal herbal healing, but then with the African magic and things like that, we call them the not so nice, the witch doctors or the voodoo doctors, or hoodoo. We kind of call it hoodoo down here, because voodoo is kind of its own religion, but hoodoo has just more of the magic and healing aspects of it. So they'd go to see these root doctors, and many times would come away feeling healed or better. And so, of course, my left brain said, placebo, but that wasn't enough of an explanation, because let's just say it was a placebo, but something had to happen in the interaction. Because if they came up to me and said, here, take this packet, hold it in your, put it in your pocket and walk around your house 5 times on Tuesday nights, and, your depression will go. That wouldn't have worked for me. So there had to be something else going on. And what I figured out is there was a dynamic live interaction, almost a performance that the root doctors enacted with their clients. And sometimes that performance was different with every client. Now, let's look real quick at psychotherapy research. That's what researchers over the last 2 decades have found in a field called the common factors. They found it's not the theories or the techniques, because when they controlled for those, all the theories and the techniques work about equally well. They're all good. It's that interaction, that aliveness that happens between the client and the therapist. So that ability to connect, that ability to use whatever is in the moment to create a dynamic performance, a therapeutic performance, if you will. One of the root doctors told me one time, he says, when people come and they're scared about evil spirits on them, he says, I've got to be scarier than the root or the curse or whatever's on them. And that really stuck with me. So he realized that I've got to be even more intense, because if I don't create an intense experience, there's not going to be change. Well, if you know anything about basic neuroplasticity in the brain is changed by experience. Information rarely changes the brain. I think we all know this, because particularly if we have children, we try to explain why they shouldn't do things. And when they become teenagers, why they should not do this and not do. And it's really the experience of consequences or just being in the moment that they actually learn, unfortunately. Well, clients and patients are the same way. If they don't have an experience, an intense experience, and it can be good as well as bad, that's where the brain gets changed. That's where the learning really truly manifest. Those healing moments are a moment of an intense experience. And that intense experience can take multiple views. I mean, some people just need someone to sit with them as they unload and just be a healing presence of quiet compassion, while others may need someone who's intense, almost in their face, kind of, this is what you got to do. But others maybe need the more playful jester who kind of picks at them a little bit. But this is where mastery comes in, because if we are so regulated to only following the script, which unfortunately too many therapists do, we miss an incredible opportunity to pay attention to the client that's in front of us, not the one you wanted, the one that's in front of you. And you have to change and adapt to that person, because the research showed it. The American Psychiatric Association came out back, 2006, that was, saying that, all the major theories and techniques are great, but it's that interaction. So for me, that's just adding validity to some of the things that I was picking up from these hoodoo doctors and root doctors, that they created these magical sessions with their own kind of unique take on things. And maybe it was time for me to see, well, how do I create a magical session? Because I'd had them and I wasn't trying. So I wanted to go and look and find out, how did I do this? How did I specifically make this happen? And so I had to kind of sit down and take things apart. And that led me to really examine, hey, sometimes it is doing something way out of the ordinary. Because if you may have noticed, just in evolution, species change when something random is introduced, not when it's the same thing every time. And therapy of any kind of interaction, coaching, whatever, has to be a dynamic, random event, something that the client sees as random, maybe the therapist too. And as far as going back to the idea of having that ability or that courage, it's kind of scary to jump off that deep end, but it makes the whole process really exciting at the same time. So you have to balance that excitement with that curiosity. Curiosity is something that I think every field should be required to have more of, because when you don't have any curiosity left in the field, you might as well put the dirt on top of the grave and say the goodbyes and move on. So having that I guess insatiable curiosity to why some people have a magic moment and some don't. I think that's what really pushed me to kind of push myself out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. And you wanted to help people. And maybe did you feel that people were not getting the changes you were hoping they could get? And you knew that there was something maybe out there that could help them even more?
Yeah, it's funny because before I started going that route, I was still, at least I thought I was. Hopefully, most of my clients agree, a pretty effective therapist. And it wasn't just that it's like, oh, I'm not getting results, but when I would see the masters of therapy work, and I said, there's like, how did she know? How did he know to do, And then, I've been very fortunate that I've been able to make a lot of good friends and well-known people in my field, some who are very famous. And if they're honest, a lot of times they don't know why they asked those questions. It just came to them and they did it. And then the magic happened. So I was like, aha, intuition. That's one of the magical features, having that spontaneity to listen to the intuition and to follow through. So what they do is they say it, they do it, then they find a way to put it back into their box of whatever XYZ therapy they're doing. And then everyone says, well, that's great. One day I wish I could be like him. I wish I could be like her. And I just want to, sound the bell. You already are. You just got to kind of walk your own path, use what you learn and tap into that. So for me, rather than trying to be someone else, it is absolutely required that you are yourself and that you open yourself up to allow that natural flow of interaction and intuition to occur. One of my favorite guitar players is a guy named Eric Gales, who's a prodigy. He started playing when he was 4. I mean, this guy, like Carlos Santana said, was like the greatest guitar player in the world. I got to meet him one time and I was asked him, how did you know when you were doing this and then you just went? He says, I just go wherever my spirit takes me. And I thought, you know what? That's what our field needs. Just to go where your spirit, your intuition, your gut feeling takes you. Scary as hell, but at the same time, it can be very rewarding too.
It's trusting intuition.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people have a hard time trusting their intuition. And of course, I have my own background of how I came to using intuition more. And part of that was also looking at some indigenous cultures and my own journey in being disappointed, disillusioned with mainstream healthcare. But I've noticed that a lot of people have a hard time trusting it. And I think that when people can move in that direction, magical things do happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree. And that's, I think, in most any field. I mean, you sometimes the attorney who just has this gut feeling to ask something in the middle of a trial that the judge may say, overrule that, whatever. But yet then it leads to something else. The accountant who just, maybe I ought to look at this other thing. Oh, it's all these fields are human fields, and our intuition, I think, is there for a reason. We're just taught by, I think, society and culture to not trust ourselves. The self-help field's got all these great things about you learn to trust yourself, and but at the same time, it's kind of an empty thing, because when it comes time to trust yourself, it's like we'll fall back on a trainer or a teacher or a mentor, and those are all important to have. But at the end of the day, you've got to step into the arena yourself. I mean, if you're going to be a great athlete, you got to get on the court, you got to get in the ring, whatever it is. And I think intuition is that if the more you do it, though, the more you're able to do it. It's like the more that you allow yourself, I should say, because kids never seem to have this problem. Have you noticed that? They just, and sometimes it ends in some interesting endeavors, when they come in with chocolate all over their face and their intuition told them to launch head first into the chocolate cake that you'd set aside for company. But at the same time, it's only when we start getting that middle school, high school, and they really start telling us, you need to check with an outside authority on how to live your life and how to do things, which may be the right thing for that time. But then we become disconnected from that gut, that just listening to your gut. I mean, I can't tell you just how many clients I've had who just say that, if I'd only listened to myself, I wouldn't have this problem. And we've all said that. And I don't know, maybe there can be a class in middle school called Listening to Your Gut 101. I don't know how you'll grade those assignments, but it sure would be a pretty interesting course that I think we all need to take.
Yeah, I'd be self-graded.
Yeah.
Well, and to your point about the guitarist, and that was a very unique person who recognized that at a young age, that intuition is being in the flow. And also it can be very playful and joyful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think that's the thing for my field. Because any healing medical related thing, you have suffering, and suffering's coming, whether the suffering's mental, whether the suffering's physical, or both, emotional, whatever. And when you are in a setting of suffering, it is sometimes so important to have some connection with play. And you would think, we have to be serious and all that. Sometimes the most serious, heartfelt cases I've worked, there's still an element of play there, not to minimize that person's grief or pain, but that a play in what can we do? What does this person need in this moment to help them? Is it the play of being present and just listening? Is it the play of cracking a joke? Is it asking about hobbies? What's funny in my field, we're taught to, when you do an assessment, you take all the information about what's not working in a person's life, as opposed to also spending equal time finding out what's working. Just asking people about their hobbies can be healing in itself, and that's really where I think my field could probably do a little better. It's better than it used to be, but we still have this constant focus on what we refer to as pathology, as in the problem. And the more time we think we spend on the problem and focus on the problem, somehow that's going to eradicate the problem. It's kind of like if you're upset about something, you somehow think that if you talk about it all the time, that somehow you're going to stop being upset about it, rather than figuring out a way to change your relationship to the problem. So that's, for me, is healing. If I can just jump to that, it's not eradicating the problem that's been brought. It's helping that person change their relationship to the problem. Because I got to be honest with you, some problems you're just not going to solve. Some problems can't be solved. I mean, if somebody comes in and their child's been, killed by a drunk driver, or their spouse is just done and leaves them, or they have a dying parent, I mean, you're not going to solve that problem. That's a problem of living. And it's even a problem, it's a stage of living. So if you can just change the way they perceive that problem, change how they relate to it, that's how people heal. Healing is not always the eradication of a symptom. It's just how you perceive that, how you relate to it, how you see that symptom in a grander scheme. And it's not sometimes what we want to hear, but I mean, that's really the truth. Because if you think that the only way that people can be healed is that they have to have every part of their life totally in a perfect place. Well, my God, none of us are healed. And maybe the inmates are running the asylum, and it might feel.
Right. And that's a definition of wellness, of being able to have a sense of well-being or even joy in the presence or absence of dis-ease.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I had a client one time who had lost her husband. He died. And she started going to grief counseling, and she found knitting very soothing to her. So she brought her knitting into the sessions. However, the therapist thought that it was distracting her from her grief. So he told her to not knit. Mm-hmm. And it broke my heart. And that's the roots of occupational therapy, is using occupation. People think occupational means that it's vocation, which is confusing to people because that's a part of OT, but really it's what occupies your time, what gives you meaning and purpose. And this person actually went on to become a mental health therapist themselves, and now uses these various ways of supporting people, including knitting or whatever will help soothe them or comfort them, so that they can get those good feelings going again, because we all want to feel good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, as you said that, instantly came to my mind, if that had been my client, I would have asked her to knit her husband a sweater, even though he's gone, and then to find someone who needed it, some important male figure in her life, and then give them the sweater. Because it's just continuing, because nothing, energy can't be created or destroyed. It just kind of changes form. And I think that's in our life, we sometimes miss what's really there in front of us, because we think this has been gone. So maybe that there's a new male in her life. Doesn't have to be a romantic person. And that's what just came to my mind, because I think if that's a resource that she has, well, I start seeing resources, I start seeing solutions, rather than, I can't bring back the husband. But it is unfortunate, because it sounds like that could have been a really amazing interaction, but someone else was probably more focused on, a certain rigid way of working, and missed a magical moment.
Right. And it taught her how to be a more magical therapist.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
And so how did you gain your confidence? Did you have a root doctor take you under their wing and mentor you?
No, I didn't, although I learned quite a bit from some very generous people. But no, and for the record, I do not consider myself anyone who's listening that a hoodoo doctor, root doctor. When my book came out called Low Country Shamanism, about that culture, I was getting phone calls and emails and people trying to get me to remove curses and things like that. And it's like, that's you. I think you might have missed the point of that. But the mentoring really is just taking in people who are creative. Certainly there are people in my field who I look up to who are just really amazing and magical and wonderful, but there are people in many fields that are magical and wonderful. There are some teachers out there who work in very difficult settings that find way to make learning come alive. It's like the movie Stand and Deliver. It's an older movie with Edward James Olmos. Jaime, I can't remember his last name, who was the renowned teacher, and he found a way to get his students interested in learning, and he was kind of magical in that way. So I think just being open to all kinds of ideas and different ways of doing things is really the secret. Having if you can find lots of different hobbies and observing creative, resourceful people, just watching kids, because if a kid can't do something, they sometimes figure out a way to do it that maybe we wouldn't have thought about it, because we already have certain paradigms on us, kind of rigidly stuck. But that's kind of, I can list a lot of names, but it is really just anyone that I see who's a creative, resourceful person. And if I'm able to talk to them, how did you do that? Why did you think about doing that? What happened there? And a lot of times what you get is, I don't know, I just kind of, my gut said do it, so I did it.
Yeah, well, because it can be risky for the linear therapist, or when you talk about listening to the gut, it makes me think about the separation of how a lot of us are trained to be up in the head. and to not feel into our bodies. And I think a big part of intuition, well, sure, it can be flashes of insight. It can be a mental, it often has a feeling component. It often has a visceral, a somatic body experience to it. And we experience it through our senses. I don't know, does that happen to you when you get those, or does it come to you more of as insights when working with your clients? Like when you just mentioned you'd have the client knit a sweater for her husband. Was that something you thought, or did you feel that? How did you get that in your consciousness, your experience?
That's a great question, and one that no one has ever asked me. I don't know how many interviews I've done, Amy, and that's the first time I've been asked that. And that's a great question because it's causing me now to go inside and think. Sometimes it's a excuse me, it's an image that pops in my head. Sometimes it's a feeling. I know sometimes I get this thing where I get like I'm just waiting them to get done what they're saying so that I could get it out real quick and not try to look like I'm okay. Yeah. Oh, here. So it's just, it can be a somatic experience. It could be a visual, something I say to myself. I think sometimes as I'm saying this, I kind of try to put myself in there, have that empathy. And I think empathy can, as long as we don't get stuck in it, can be helpful. I think it's just being open, just mentally going in and just saying, hey, whatever happens, happens. And that's not something that's originally was very easy for me because I tend to be a very linear science kind of A, B, cause and effect thinker. And I had to kind of train myself to go back to being more of a systemic, how one thing affects another, can affect another, and just being open to that. I also find that sometimes when you're in the middle of a session, any kind of session, and it's going okay, but there's no magic in it, there's no, zest, sometimes just stopping and asking the most random thing that has come to you can yield so many incredible returns. So if you're talking with someone and they're talking on, and you notice that they have a unique item of clothing, or they mention something about a cousin, or just to stop and say, now tell me about that. So this cousin, you said he's in Wisconsin. What's he doing in Wisconsin? Just has nothing to do with the moment, but then it leads into other things. That piece of jewelry tends to be from a family member. So then you talk about the family member and how that family member maybe dealt with issues and problems. And then you get ideas from that. So I think it's just that everything has to be open as opposed to a relentless pursuit of more problem talk. I mean, I think it's so important that we honor people's stories of what's happened to them. But if you're spending, you've seen a client like 6 sessions, if you're a psychotherapist, and the bulk of the time you've talked about the problem and it's all about the problem, you're really missing opportunities because the problem is kind of, it's like it's in this box, it's in this frame, and inside is the problem. Anything related to the problem only kind of reinforces the problem. Now, what the bulk of therapy is that we have to get inside the frame of the problem and try to argue, try to tell people to think about this problem that's in the frame differently, to create a solution, because you can't have a problem without a solution. But guess what? You can't have a solution without a problem. So we get kind of stuck in those kind of circular ways of interacting with the problem. And when things don't work well, we sometimes make a horrible mistake by blaming our clients and telling the clients they're resistant or something like that. But just that getting outside of that frame, to asking, going back to the random, and then you find a resource. So for example, going back real quick to your story, knitting, they're coming for something that had nothing to do with the knitting. The knitting is outside the problem. And that grief would have been helped, I think, a lot more by going and talking about knitting, joining a knitting group, talking about knitting for other people, whatever it is. That's how people move and heal. It's not by being stuck relentlessly in problem talk and spending too much time with what's not working. You got to balance it out with what is working. And it can be surprising because again, we're so multi-dimensional people. So if we access a resource in some area that we don't think is related, a lot of times we're surprised how those two are actually very related.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah. And I love what you say about being open because myself as an intuitive and yourself as well, that is where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're closed, my mind goes to energetic states of consciousness, meaning that we can literally block certain information from coming to us. And by being open, even setting that intention for those who are listening, I think intentions are very powerful. That maybe even, or practitioners such as yourself or myself who want to have a magical session and aren't quite sure how to do that, maybe even set an intention at the beginning that you're just going to be more open and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of roll with and see what happens and go, from there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And if someone does that and they're afraid, realize nothing bad's going to happen most of the time. If you have any sense in your brain and you've been properly trained in whatever field you're doing, getting off script probably not going to hurt anybody. As one of my mentors told me one time, sometimes you got to let people drift a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
because if it's always about the one thing, that drifting will take you to different places. So being open, as you say, it can maybe help with that drifting.
Absolutely. So, is there anything else that's coming to mind for you in this moment that you want to share or have other people hear that you think is important around magical healing?
The biggest thing is that's coming up for me, as it usually is that we all are doing the best we can with what we have. It's just a lot of times we get kind of stuck into these kind of pattern ways of seeing the world. And I think that's for people in my field. We get caught in patterns of how we see clients. So just being able to say, okay, this is a unique client, even though the story sounds, and these stories do run together because they do sound, we're all having similar experiences, but that this is a unique person, a unique individual who needs something in this moment that if I'm so sticking to some idea that I have, a preconceived idea, that I might not be able to deliver that to them. So just by saying, okay, how unique is this person? One of my therapy mentors is a brilliant psychiatrist and hypnotherapist named Dr. Milton Erickson, and he told all his students that every client is as unique as their thumbprint. And I think that we have a tendency to overlook that. I mean, the medical doctor comes in with his or her charts. They see the name long enough to greet them, and it's all the information, forgetting that there's an individual in front of them sometimes that is unique. I mean, let's be quite blunt, our bodies are unique, because if that's the case, there'd be one type of antibiotic. I mean, because we'd all be, yeah, that's all we need, So everyone's body's different, everyone's mind's different, how they perceive things. And I mean, research has been around longer than I have. There's a book called Persuasion and Healing by Jerome Frank, which talks about not just psychotherapy, but even medicine, the doctors who have a connection with their patients tend to get better overall because there's that trust, there's that ability to have that empathy, and just spending time to say, okay, I see there's an individual in front of me who is different from me. I mean, not just ethnically, economically, all that, but yet there's that common connection of this human experience we have. And if we just allowed that to be first and foremost, all these other intuition things, it's so much easier to just kind of slide out and to flow, because you're creating, but you're co-creating. No matter what you're doing, you're co-creating this with the other person. So when you're stuck to an idea or a theory or technique, you're trying to create something that you haven't really consulted the client. So it's in that co-creation, I think, that really the magic comes out.
Yeah. And there's being present with your client can create magic.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. I mean, that's it. And again, it takes multiple forms. based on that individual client and you. I mean, I don't want anyone to be me. I don't want to be anyone. I mean, I would prefer to be someone who had more hair in the back, but that's my own emotional baggage. But
Well, and it's, yeah.
yeah, it's I want people to be themselves. I mean, talking with you, it's like you're finding your way. You feel like you've stepped into your own kind of self when you're working with people, and the worst thing you could do is say, well, maybe I should be doing this like another intuitive healer, another therapist, or all of that, and all the great healers throughout time. I think to be yourself, and sometimes it's not pretty, but that's okay. I remember hearing about a therapist whose name escapes me, where his client told him at the end of their time together, it's really heavy duty sessions, said, a lot of times I didn't like you at all. I thought you were a real ass, but I knew down deep that you cared about me, and what you were doing was there to help me. So I kept coming. And I think that's very telling, because they know people spot a phony. So be yourself.
Definitely. And that unconditional presence, unconditional, maybe even love, which I think can be radical for a lot of therapists to even think of love and compassion, can, in my experience, really opens that flow up for people, for them to feel safe and trust. And that's where I think a lot of magic can happen as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sad thing is, where most therapists have trouble, the research is showing, I hate to say this, is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that may be because we're getting too distracted, and we need to get back to being that presence for other people.
Right. And if we keep looking at people as problems, then it just becomes a headache versus what are the opportunities. And one thing I've noticed in my experience working with many clients over the years, such as yourself, is that every single client, like you say, has a unique way that they need to be helped and healed that isn't cookie cutter, as you describe in your book. And every client I've worked with has taught me something that I needed to learn in that moment in my life as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember reading a book called Aesthetics of Change years ago. It made a big impact on me. The author was Bradford Keeney, who was one of the leading figures at that time in cybernetic epistemology and systems thinking and therapy. And he made this one little comment about, what if the therapist role is not to heal the client, but the client to challenge the therapist to heal. And I was like, okay, it's just a different way to see it, that it is this kind of circular interaction.
Yeah, my clients have been some of my best teachers. So we should wind down here in just a moment. Could you share, what does God or spirituality mean to you?
I mean, professionally, you mean?
Well, and personally, professionally, it seems like a non sequitur, but that's a big part of magic, is that metaphysical, the spiritual. And here at Healing Connections, we're all about the holistic, the mind, body, spirit. So I like to ask my guests this question.
Well, as of this point in my life, I'm an agnostic. Mm-hmm. I one times it was an atheist, and then I figured out that was a little too limiting and didn't quite. I think that's very closed-minded. For other people, it's fine, but for me, I'm an agnostic. I just don't know. But to tie in professionally, it is very important for me when I'm working with people, because spirituality, religion, all of those things are tremendous resources. And I think if we don't go those places, here's a funny thing I just want to share, is that research has shown that our clients want to talk about spirituality. They want to talk about strange things. They want to talk about things we might call paranormal that happen to them and all of that. But they're hesitant too, because they're afraid of how we'll respond. Well, if you're someone who's not religious, you can still make a space for them to talk about those things if they choose, because those are resources. If somebody's, like example with the lady knitting, if she brought up in that session, I was her therapist, that she thinks her husband's spirit's still around her, that's a wonderful belief. I mean, can't prove it, but it's a wonderful belief. Why not utilize that belief to get her to do other things that will help kind of move her along the stages of grief? So, yeah, again, it's being open to whatever. I don't bring up my own personal beliefs generally, but I think there's just too much mystery in life to think I've figured it all out. And I think that's kind of where I am, an agnostic who goes, I just don't know. I used to joke, it's like I was that way about the opposite sex. I just don't know. I can't figure it out. So maybe that's a recurring theme in my life too.
You're funny. Well, and again, that openness to people's spiritual and religious beliefs can be very healing and profound, like you say, for those strengths. And one of the things that I am an advocate of is all practitioners checking their own, we talk about skin color and gender and all of this. And I think spiritual and religious biases need to be checked as well. And clearly you are very open and accepting of people's beliefs and strengths to draw upon, which can help further create magical and truly transformative, beautiful, loving, joyful healing for people. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I find that we're all more similar than different.
Absolutely. So if somebody wanted to find a practitioner such as yourself, well, first of all, how can they get in touch with you if they would like to contact you for maybe some healing, magical healing, or maybe they're a practitioner who wants to learn more about how they can also implement this into their practice as well? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, thank you. The easiest way is my website, which is Dr. Paul Leslie, DrPaulLeslie.com. And on there, I have links to coaching I do, my online courses, books. So that's probably the best place to find me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for everything you've shared, Paul. And if somebody is, for some reason, not able to connect with you and work with you, are there some qualities that you could describe someone could look for in a practitioner to have more of this kind of healing in their lives?
I would just recommend that the client just follow their gut, because pretty quickly if you're working or not. I mean, if you feel safe, if you feel comfortable, if you feel nurtured, and that, to me, that's magical in of itself. You don't have to look and try to find a therapist who throws rugs on people or is trained with root doctors. So if you just happen to connect with someone, then that's the right person for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for all that you've shared today, Dr. Paul J. Leslie. It's truly been magical and an honor to speak with you.
Well, the honor has been all mine, Emmy. Thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you all for joining us. Until next time, be well.